Welcome to But Jesus Drank Wine.
And other stories that kept us stuck. I'm Mead.
And I'm Christy.
And in this podcast, we'll explore the stories that kept us, stuck, wanting to drink and not wanting to drink all at the same time.
Join us as we show you that freedom from alcohol does not have to mean a life sentence of misery and missing out,
but actually means living an authentic life full of peace, joy, and purpose.
Hi, my beautiful friend. It's Christy here. What if this Lent wasn't just about giving something up, but about stepping into something greater? What if after 40 days of no alcohol, you woke up on Easter Sunday feeling fully in control, refreshed, and renewed? We're coaching through my book, Love Life Sober, a 40-day alcohol fast, kicking off on March 5th. There'll be 2 coaching calls a week, and don't worry if you can't make them live, we're going to record them for you in our private But Jesus Drank Wine community. To get all of the information, just head to the show notes where you'll find a link. We can't wait to see you.
Welcome to the But Jesus Drank Wine pod. Mead here with you to introduce you to our very special guest today. Christy and I sat down with Dr. Lisa Stanton recently and had just a lovely time hearing her freedom from alcohol story. Dr. Lisa is she is so super duper smart and really funny, y'all. And so we hope you'll enjoy this conversation, but wanted to give you a little background on Dr. Lisa. She holds a PhD in social psychology from the University of Minnesota. Her expertise is in behavior change theory and applications. During grad school, she was named the Student Advisory Council Chair for the Society for Health Psychology, a division of the APA, and was a finalist for the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. After finishing her PhD, she spent 2 years in the Department of Preventive Medicine at Northwestern in Chicago, where she completed a National Cancer Institute T32 postdoctoral research fellowship in behavioral cancer prevention and control. During grad school and her postdoctoral fellowship, she taught or assisted in the teaching of 18 undergrad and master's level courses. She's co-authored 30 academic publications and several encyclopedia entries. She has spoken at numerous psychology conferences across the US and in Europe, and before starting her most recent writing endeavors, she worked remotely for a year as a researcher for a health tech startup in California. I told y'all, she is super duper smart. And despite her vast educational background, you will not find psychology nor behavior change theory in the solutions offered in Dr. Lisa's weekly essays or videos where she shares with thousands of followers on her Instagram page at Dr. Lisa Stanton, nor in the pages of her book, 52 Life-Changing Lessons I Learned in Recovery. Her recent writings are about her personal experiences in recovery from not only alcohol addiction, but also eating disorders, anxiety conditions, ADHD, IBS, alopecia, and more. She writes about her journey from the belief that more scientific knowledge would solve all of her problems to her experience that a relationship with God does. We're so excited for you to hear this episode, but one quick final note before we get started. This comes with a content warning. This episode does reference some sensitive topics, including sexual assault and trauma. We recognize that these subjects may be difficult or triggering for some listeners, so please take care of yourself while listening. If you or someone you know is in need of support, please seek help from a trusted resource or helpline. And if you have the little people in the car with you while you're listening, go ahead and just turn it off for now and come back to it when the little ears are not around. It's definitely not an episode suited for the little beings in our lives. With all of that, I'm so happy to present our chat with Dr. Lisa.
Hello, my beautiful friend. Happy Monday. We are really excited to have our new friend, Dr. Lisa Stanton, in the podcast studio today. Hey, Lisa, how are you?
So good. How are you guys?
Good.
We're so glad you're here.
We are just literally just such a round of youths today, you guys.
I always ruin that. I always ruin the
Um,
intro.
we really need to also come up with some like new fresh language. And I know that we say this all the time, but we said the exact same thing for every guest. But it's so hard because I really am excited.
I know. That's what's so we just need to pull out that synonym thing finder and get a whole bunch of different words thrown at us. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, totally.
We're
Lisa,
jazzed. We're jazzed.
well, I found Lisa, shock of all shocks, on the Instagram. I think, was it maybe through Dr. Warren? I found you? I'm not sure, but I've been following you for a while and so excited to hear about your new book. And the episodes, I think that when we record, have the most impact on our listeners are just like hearing stories of other gals who have been on a freedom from alcohol or whatever other addiction journey. And so I would just love to hear your story.
Yeah.
You just take the wheel.
Um, yeah. So I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's like an hour and a half, 2 hours west of Philadelphia. Two parents. My mom has a PhD in sociology. And my dad, I don't know, has a master's degree in something. And they both were like stable, well adjusted, loving adults. And they ended up the first sort of like major thing now that I'm sober, when I think back to what happened, is they got divorced. I always mess up the age, which is funny. If my mom's listening, sorry. 4 or 5. She always corrects me. She listens to every podcast I'm on.
Aw.
She's, honey, you're gonna get this someday. So around 5, they got divorced. And at the time, if you asked me, did it affect me? I would have been like, no, it was very amicable, almost to the point, which is interesting as I looked back, amicable to the point that I never even felt comfortable asking why. Right? It was just like everyone appears to be okay, so let's just move on and pretend that this didn't happen. So they get divorced, and that's the first, like, actually, probably like life memory that I really have is this like sitting in the corner of my L couch in the basement. I'm telling you that they're going to get divorced, and this like buzzing happened in my head. Right? Didn't react at all. My sister, who was 2 years older, burst into tears, and I was just sitting there to the point where they were like, "She okay? Did she hear us? Does she know what I said? Does she not know what I said? What's even going on here?" And eventually I just asked, "Does that mean I have 2 houses now?" Which is apropos to how I started dealing with things emotionally after that. Basically just decided that like emotions are not going to be a thing. Like, I joked in a meeting yesterday that I was in. I was like, I feel like my two emotions were like, am I in trouble or am I like not in trouble and doing well? And those are not even emotions. So just like really in that moment, shut down in ways that I couldn't understand. But then on the outside, I feel like a lot of things were going well. If other people look back at my childhood, they're like, oh, she went to private school. She had some friends. She did really well in sports. Like all of that was good. But on the inside, it was like just turmoil to try to get along with people. I couldn't figure, like, we're talking like in first grade. I'm like, how do these other first graders know how to be friends with one another? And I think in some ways that's why I gravitated toward organized sports, because I was coordinated and good at them. And it was a way to make friends without having these like amorphous social interactions. Um, so that kind of brings me through like elementary school. And I went into middle school a little bit, but I always back up to 5th grade because I think it was that time was pivotal in my life for a few reasons. So both my parents had gotten um or were in the process. My dad had already been remarried, and my mom was like about to get remarried right around that time. And a good friend of mine. So like I said, trouble making friends, but there was this other kid named John who was in my class who also had divorced parents and also was like a little bit weird. And I don't want to call him weird, but I was weird for sure. But we got along, and that there's pain going on in the household, and we can't really identify why. But his parents obviously had a very different divorce and a lot of mental illness. And when I was in 5th grade, his mom actually murdered him and then committed suicide. So it was this like big, and my class was like my entire grade, because I went to private school, was like 32 people. So
Oh,
it's a very like close knit thing. They offered grief counseling, like a lot of stuff happened, but I was already so shut down that it was fine. right? If you ask me, I was like, it's fine. Today it actually is fine, but I was actually not fine in
Yeah.
fifth grade. And my response was to just be like, no, everything's fine. They're like, you don't need grief counseling. I'm like, nope, all's well. Like, carry on. Everything's fine. We weren't that close anyway, right? All of these things that just deflect. And that kind of set up. So right around that time too. And I look back now at little kid brains, and I don't consider myself so a little kid at 10, 11, 12. I didn't process like an adult, right? I wasn't like, oh, this woman was suffering and this is why this happened. I was like, this is confusing. Why would a mom do this? And then right around the same time, a like close family friend of ours, her mom died of cancer. And then also around the same time, my mom had gotten remarried to my stepdad, who's great, but he had previously been married to an alcoholic, ironically, and she died of alcoholism related liver stuff at that time. So there was just like moms went nuts was like how my little brain processed that. And then I ended up with a bunch of it's called separation anxiety disorder, but these weird like crazy nightmares that my mom was going to die. And when I would go to my dad's house, I would burst into tears. So just like very confused and also not able to articulate why I was confused. And I went to a little bit of therapy, but I always found therapy I don't know. What literally just came to mind is it smelled weird, which doesn't even totally make sense. But that's the words that came to my mind. Was just like it smelled weird, and I just didn't want a part of it. And so I just my again, just like shoving it down. Nothing's wrong. Everything's fine. And that kind of brings me through. Middle school was the first time where I really had a group of friends. Still not comfortable in that group of friends. Every day would wake up and be like, when are they not going to want to be my friend anymore? But looked on the outside like I had that group of friends. But that kind of brings me into that group. I ended up like popular for the first time in my life in middle school, end of middle school, high school. And then that's when I started drinking for the first time. So the summer after eighth grade, we were like hanging out with the 11th and 12th grade boys. Like when I was a freshman in high school, I was dating the quarterback who was a senior. So we
Yeah.
were just like, maybe there's something to that.
Well,
but, but so that's all happening. My very first drink, I was a problem right away. I know that's not everybody's story. I think the first one was an accident. My friend had, like, called me and she was drinking it's, like, after 8th grade. I think they maybe had health class, but, like, beer is different than wine, and I just didn't get the memo. But she called me, we were going to this going away party because my friend was going to boarding school, because often private school kids like, the East Coast go to boarding school instead of continuing to private school, high school. So he was going to boarding school, and we were having this little party, and they call me, and they're like, "We're drinking, you should drink too." And I'm like, What do I do?" And they're like, "Take it from your parents." And I was like, "What? Okay, what are you drinking?" And she was like, 12 ounces, 12 ounces, and just like, hung up. And I'm sure she drank like a Coors Light, right? Like she saw 12 ounces on the thing. I chose
oh
whiskey
no. Oh no.
and I carefully,
Oh
carefully
no.
measured because I wanted to drink the same amount. 12 ounces whiskey, stole it from the thing, put it in a measuring cup, poured it into, I don't know if you had, my mom like loved Asics running shoes, those like opaque silver Asics water bottles that were like cool back then. Poured it into this water bottle, and then my sister was driving me to this party. It's like a 1 mile drive. So I chug the 12 ounces of whiskey
No.
into the car.
No.
And at that point, you can't really tell how tall I am now, but I was an even smaller person then. So now I'm like 5'6". I was probably like 5 feet tall, maybe 100 pounds. Like, probably not. So, like, really small human, just consumed 12 ounces. So obviously, my body reacted by being like, she poisoned us.
Yeah.
So within a few minutes, I like threw up everywhere, but enough had already been absorbed that like I was very drunk. I just didn't die because I threw up everywhere. But I have the time of my life, right? That's the funny part about when you're like headed, like looking back and being like this, the literally browned out memories of just going to the bathroom and trying to pull my pants up and I can't. And I slam into the wall and then I just laugh on the floor for like 10 minutes, then don't get up, then like finally come out of the bathroom. But it's like those memories were stored as that was the best thing ever. That was so fun. Let's do it again. And that really started the journey of basically, I think I was on my way to daily drinking, but I didn't know it yet. Because if someone had given me alcohol that I could have consumed every day at that time, especially if it was legal and I knew I wouldn't get in trouble, I think I would have started that day. But obviously, just the structures around me at that time didn't allow that. So all through high school, I basically drank whenever I could, but I also at the same time have this perfectionism achievement thing. So like I will drink as much as possible as long as I am still getting all A's and on the varsity, right? Which is actually a surprising amount that you can still drink. If you're me, that you can still drink and do all of those things. But that was basically like high school. I had 14 varsity letters in 12 seasons because they let me run cross country and play soccer at the same time. And I got one B plus in ninth grade, but otherwise I got all A's. And all that was happening while I was probably drinking maybe in ninth grade, like one or two times a week. But certainly by 10th grade, I was drinking like in the bathroom at school. And I actually, the closest I ever got to being expelled in high school was I drank, I don't know, several shots. We know that I was not being super careful back then of 99 apples before a soccer game where I was starting center midfielder on the soccer team.
My
Not
gosh.
just watching the game, I was playing the game. And it was just like a mess. Like I was stumbling on the field, trying to get up, whatever. And somehow in the end, I said it was food poisoning. And then there were some other girls I drank with, but none of them had really drank to the extent one other might have drank to the extent that I did. But she's also sober now for what it's worth. And so that's just like one little microcosm of like how this worked. Like there was days where we would have these soccer practices where it was like not as serious and I would be drunk because I knew that I could be drunk during that time. So I'm talking like any time where I saw an opening of like it would be okay to be drunk in this situation, I was drunk in that situation. So at that same time, so like 10th grade, I also developed an eating disorder for the first time. And that started with anorexia. And I talk about that here because I now understand that as just like yet another addiction. And I know that might bother some people, especially if you're like suffering from an eating disorder right now and you're like, no, my psychiatrist told me it's this. And I ended up like coming to a place where I feel that I'm in like long term recovery from that too, in the same way that I got sober. And I think that's why I understand it that way. And like all of these different things, like they have been given psychological labels because they can be given psychological labels because we need labels in order to get treatment from psychologists covered by insurance, right? In order to get all of this stuff. But that doesn't mean, I guess, from my perspective, that it's not spiritual that's underneath it. So I understand those two as just basically being like two peas in a pod, another way that I was trying to soothe all of the stuff that I had suppressed inside of me. So I eating disordered the same way that I drank. I like went from I think I was only like 5'3" at the time, but I was normal weight. That's the other thing. It's not like I was overweight. I just found anorexia, got into all of the background anorexia boards on the internet somehow at that time and went from 115 to in the 80s in
Oh,
3
my.
months. Right? So just the same way I drank, I was just like, yeah, I'm not eating anymore. That's just what we're doing. I became vegan so that people couldn't attack me about it because I'm just trying to save the world by not eating cows anymore and the whole thing. So that's going on. And then the anorexia with the drinking just became this crazy thing. So then whenever I blacked out, I could blame it on my eating disorder because people don't feel bad when high school kids drink too much, but they do when they're anorexic. And it became this whole ball of confusion that I eventually got sent to treatment after school with a psychologist and a dietitian for the anorexia just so I wouldn't die. They were like, no, you literally have to go. And I weight restored, but I never restored anything mentally. Spirituality wasn't even on my radar. So I spent basically the rest of the eating disorder story is basically just evolving eating disorder. So then I developed binge eating disorder and then I would like exercise to try to offset it because then I was scared of gaining weight. And then eventually I found bulimia and that was basically my whole 20s. I was throwing up like multiple times a day, definitely multiple times a week sometimes. So it was like a big part of the story. They both run in parallel for me. I know for some people, one's way bigger than the other. I feel in the end, they were both almost like equally problematic for me in my life. I graduate high school, went to University of Richmond in Virginia to go to school, but also I had a spot on their Division One track and cross country team because of my exercise compulsion. I was running all the time and I got really good at running and I got a scholarship. But I fully understand that as basically like eating disorder, compulsive behavior at this point. So I go there and then my bones, like I'm drinking all the time. I'm barely eating. Like I'm eating sugar-free syrup and like through a straw and calling it breakfast. Like I'm not eating normally at all. And so my leg broke is how I explain it. I wouldn't even say like I didn't break my leg because that requires something happening. I just got a stress fracture that ended up cracking three-quarters of the way through my shin because my bones were just not boning anymore. And then from there, I basically just decided I'm not going to do track and cross country at all anymore. I think at the time I blamed getting along with my coach or something. I've actually tried to call her a couple times to make amends and she didn't pick up, but
Aw.
she hears this. That's why I'm calling you. But it was all me, right? Which I couldn't see at the time. But so I quit and I end up just joining a sorority instead. And it was like I sometimes in the past have said like it was like a drinking sorority, but I'm looking back, not even sure if it was or if it just was for me. It was certainly like people were partying, but then looking back, I'm like, but they were also making these like lasting friendships and doing things together. And I don't think that other people made their entire college experience about drinking like I did, even the ones who were like in my sorority or in my friend groups in the way that I used to think everyone had done this. So college, once again, that same story as high school. I think my GPA in college is like 3.9 something. So I was scholarship chair of my sorority and I was constantly on social probation because I would black out at our socials, right? So like the same, like how can you be, I would get all 4.0 this semester, highest GPA in her pledge class, highest GPA, whatever. And then they're like, but also she can't come to any social events because she blacks out all the time. So it was this like that too, whatever you call it, like living that double life. And so I graduated college and had gotten really into research while I was there, trying to figure out what in the world is going on with me. And so I go straight from college to a PhD program in social psychology, but there's a part of social psychology that's really studying health at University of Minnesota. So now I'm 22. I'm in a PhD program where I'm going to figure this all out. Why do people, what I was literally studying is people's beliefs about their body weight and how that influences perceptions of weight stigma, exercise behavior, eating behavior, social support, like perceptions of social support, right? So I'm like, I'm gonna figure out at least this eating disorder thing. Cause by that point I had so much shame about the alcohol thing that it's funny when I look back, I had people even in grad school be like, why don't you ever ask about alcohol use in your studies? I'm like, people don't drink that much. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
I just can't accept that I drink that much. But yeah, so I'll just like basically say my 20s. So that was 22 all the way up until 29 was just more of the same, right? I'm doing well in grad school. I'm publishing papers that are in scientific journals. I'm leading projects. I'm learning statistics. And at the same time, anyone who met me during that time would have said, there's something wrong. Like when she drinks, it is not like other people. Every single roommate I've ever had has done some type of like little mini intervention. Every boyfriend has done that. I had friends in college who did an intervention and brought me to an AA meeting. I had a friend in high school who told me I was going to die if I didn't get help. So there's been like these little things that were happening all along. And for me, the beginning of the end came. So I finished my PhD when I was 28. So in 2019, branded Dr. Lisa. Nothing on the inside changed. I'm still insecure. I'm still drinking all the time. I did actually quit drinking for 44 days to finish my dissertation because I was like not going to finish it. But I would say the third addiction that I suffered from was seeking male approval. Maybe third is perfectionism and then male approval. But so I found a boyfriend basically at that time who gave me a drinking ultimatum and then like basically took care of me like a babysitter for 44 days while I finished my dissertation. So it was just a mess. So I do finish, but like the day that I finished, I went on a rooftop in Minneapolis and drank like 7 Manhattans and made a scene. So it was just a mess always. So I go to Chicago because after I finished my PhD, I got a postdoctoral fellowship at Northwestern School of Medicine in downtown Chicago in the Department of Prevention, working on oncology projects for secondary cancer survivors. So people, breast and ovarian cancer, have a pretty high behavioral component. So 40% of risk is like eating, exercise, stress. So I was working on how to get people to change their eating, exercise, and stress behavior to prevent cancer recurrence, right? Everything looks like it's going great on the outside. Lisa's at Northwestern. And that's really when I was like living by myself instead of with roommates. And it just, my everything was out of control. Like it was just a mess. The men was a mess. The drinking was a mess. The bulimia was a mess. It was just like a pot that was ready to boil over. And then the pandemic happened and I didn't have to. So in Chicago, I had to go to work. Like I had to get on the train, be in my office at 9, leave the office at 5. So it had slowed down because in graduate school, I never had to do that. It had made my drinking more kind of nights and weekends, but I was definitely showing up to work hungover all the time. And then the pandemic happened and I was home, and that was just the beginning of the end.
Imagine stepping into a vibrant, warm community where faith, friendship, and freedom from alcohol all come together. That's exactly what you'll experience in the But Jesus Drank Wine community. Each week, our members gather for connection calls that feel like a breath of fresh air, a time to share, grow, and support one another. With an encouraging leadership team, a dedicated prayer request space, and connection opportunities in every time zone, you don't have to walk this journey alone. Plus, we bring you masterclasses with expert guests, optional book clubs and Bible studies, and so much more. And for those ready to go even deeper, we offer a small group coaching space called The Missing Piece. With weekly recorded coaching calls, it's a supportive place for women committed to breaking free from alcohol. We're here to hold space for sober and sober curious women who love Jesus or are eager to reconnect with him. Wherever you are on your path, you'll feel seen, supported, and strengthened here. As one member described, quote, "The BJDW community is unique because there's a connection between faith and freedom from alcohol that I haven't been able to find in any other online space or through my church." Ready to join the sisterhood? Head over to butjesusdrankwine.com/community or click the link in the show notes to learn more. We can't wait to meet you.
And then the pandemic happened and I was home, and that was just the beginning of the end. So I just couldn't stop drinking, and I turned to box wine because there was a Trader Joe's up the road and that was cheap. And I was drinking box wine 24 hours a day on my phone on Tinder, just like going to random men's places because I lived in the studio apartment and I didn't want to be in my studio apartment during the pandemic. Like it's probably dangerous because we're giving each other probably COVID, which like doesn't even cross my mind because I'm so wrapped up in everything else that's going on. I'm drunk for all of those situations, right? It's just, and I'm throwing up all the time. So it was just a disaster. And then one morning, like in April, probably. So it had been like 3 or 4 months of that. I woke up, I peed my bed, I had my period. It was nasty. I also had my bed on these like risers, and one of them had slipped out. So the bed's like sideways. Like the whole thing is just not the scene. Um, and I woke up and for some reason was like, this has to stop. Like I have to do something. And I don't know why this is what I decided, but I just started driving back toward Minneapolis. I don't know why. I didn't have any place to stay there. I'm not even from there, right? I'm from Pennsylvania. It was just like where I spent graduate school. So I started driving back. I wish I could be like, then I got sober, but I ended up staying with an ex-boyfriend because that's how I was functioning at the time, who lived there. And he was the first person to witness how much worse my drinking had gotten. And he's not, I dated him for 5 or 6 years. He was never, he like made some nudges while we were dating, but he was never like that. Probably he was a little worried about it, but not to this level. So I come back and within 2 weeks, he's, I don't know what has happened to you, but you cannot stay here if you're going to drink like this. I thought that you came here to get away from being in the city. This is not what's happening. So, like any good alcoholic, I went on a 5-day bender going on. There's a big lake out here called Lake Minnetonka where people have these big boats and they party all the time. So I go there for 5 days, don't come home. And then I finally came home like the Tuesday after Memorial Day that year and had that moment of just, I'm done. I think I'm really done this time. And within a short period of time, started attending recovery meetings, got a sponsor, started heading in the direction, I would say, of sobriety and recovery. But for me, so at that time, I was not interested in God. Like, you tell me to believe in God, I'm like, literally, stupid people in middle America believe in God. I have a PhD. Like, that was my literal. I could go as far as I had like, accepted that kind of. I listened to some podcasts about astrology and the universe and green juice, and somehow that had all smushed together in some way that I could like. I found that more palatable. Obviously, because it's not actually God, it's easier to find it palatable if you're just completely lost, which I didn't know that was why it felt more palatable at the time. So I spent the first 6 or 7 months of trying to be sober, doing that, and I was used to that. The boyfriend I just talked about from my 20s is in the cannabis industry, which I know you'd be like, "How is that connected?" But he owned a bunch of cannabis farms in Northern California. So I had spent a lot of time in Northern California, and everybody up there is like hippie and doing this and doing that. And all of that like new age vibe up there. So I was really used to it. He loves astrology, right? So it wasn't new. When someone said like you need a higher power, I was like, fine, I got this. And it seems really smart because they're like telling you that God's not real, but here's what really is real and here's the truth about this. So it's like the intelligent the now I think of it as like intelligentsia, the intellectual pride part of me was soothed by this situation. So I spent 7 months or so doing that. And it was like I mostly wasn't drinking, but I like couldn't stop smoking weed. I kept doing mushrooms because I thought I was having spiritual experiences. I did a bunch of like the very last drink I had was because I did too much LSD and I needed to come down from it. And alcohol brings you down when you've done too much LSD. So I was like nowhere near touching sobriety, nor touching the peace of God, like nothing even close to that. And then finally, shortly after Christmas Day, I'd gone to a new meeting for Christmas Day. And for some reason, that's when I like finally heard the message like, kid, you're going to need God. Like, you're going to have to drop everything that you thought you knew about life in order to get better. And January 4th, 2021, I went into it's not relevant that the church is Catholic. It just is relevant because I hadn't been in churches in a long time. And when it's a Catholic church, there's Jesus is like hanging on the cross. It's not just a cross. There's the he's on the cross that's in front of me. And so I kneeled down. I had asked for help from this guy, and he was like, I was like, "You're so happy, and whatever, you have to show me what you do." And we like drive to this church, and I'm like, "This is a big freaking secret. Like, what?" And he's just like, redo that. There's like a prayer that you turn your will and your life over to God. And he's like, "Why don't you just try redoing it, but use the real God this time?" And I was like, "God, this freaking guy." So I go in there and do what he said to do. And I'm like, see, nothing happened. Like nothing happened. And we turn around and the janitor who was he was like in there mopping or whatever, because 11 a.m. in the middle of the day during COVID, there's no one in church except me. He turned around as we were walking out and he was like, "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" And we're like, "Yeah, sorry, we didn't know that we couldn't be in here." We think he wants us to not be in there. And he's I don't know what you guys just did, but the Holy Spirit just told me something pretty important happened and that I'm supposed to let you know. And I lit a prayer candle over there. It'll be burning for the next 7 days if you guys want to come back. And I was like, "Let's."
So on the hair on my arm just stood up.
Yeah. So I'm like, what? The heavens didn't open up for me. And he's, oh my gosh, you need a human messenger? Fine. Let's just get the message across. So that happens, and I think what's important to note always is that I still wasn't like, "This is it, I got it." I was like, "That was interesting." And then, like, over the next few days, for me, the foundation of my sobriety, which I never thought I would say, believe, whatever, has been reconciliation with God. And like for me too, having another human hear those things. So what's really funny, probably not recommended by I don't know, the people who care about rules in sobriety, but the guy who brought me to that church ended up being like he was just helping me through a lot of stuff and then I ended up basically like doing the whole life confession thing like with him. He's not my husband, by the way. So I was like, I don't, but he knows my whole past, which is actually really nice to have that open relationship with your husband. Um, but he did, so it was to God and to another human. And I think both of those were like really profound because there was some things that like I was willing to tell God, but really afraid to tell another human. Obviously, given my sexual conduct, there was a lot of like sexually transmitted diseases in that history. And to be able to, another human, but now, and it's a human who chose to love me anyway and is now my husband, right? Like those things are like profound works of God's love in and of themselves. But just to have, I say whatever I'm going to say, and he's great. Anything else? It's not like this terrifying thing where they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's what you did. That's what your sex conduct was like. This is how you've been treating your body. This is how this has been happening." Just like, beautiful. You're going to help a lot of people. Is there anything else? Right. And that's what he just kept saying over and over again as I would say, okay, I really am actually mad about my parents' divorce. I really am. I'm mad at John's mom. Is that even fair? Because I know she was mentally ill. I'm mad at John for being dead. And I never would have gotten to like those types of levels of just like forgiveness and the ability to see reality clearly if I hadn't gone to God with all of this like stuff that I had. Or even, I mean, I'm just like throwing things out because I'm sure listeners have different experiences, especially if they're drinking, but like I used to think that, like, I was allowed to be mad. So most, I don't want to say most, I, as a woman who drank a lot and was a mess, had a lot of situations where I was like, was I sexually assaulted? Was I not sexually assaulted? I don't know how I showed up here. Why am I in this position? Why am I in this place? And I thought that the way to feel better about that was to blame them, to say, like, I was assaulted. He knew what he was doing. This is what it is. And through this process, I woke up to like, it's the opposite of what society says. But if I hadn't been in the place where I was mentally, is what he did wrong? Maybe, but that's between him and God. I want to say that first. I have no idea. That's between him and God. But when I looked at it as, look at my conduct, right? Since I got sober and stopped going to bars, stopped flirting with men, stopped dressing in ways that I wanted to attract men, stopped. It's the opposite. Society says you can do all these things and you should still be safe. And that is absolutely true. You should be able to do all those things and still be safe. But I still have to look at like, where did I show up in these ways where I created the pain that I blamed other people for? And that was just like such a huge part of my healing. And then fast forwarding to like over the last 4 years and into today, the biggest thing has just been like dropping all these beliefs that I thought that I had. Like I truly thought that Christians believe that God was like a white man floating up there somewhere. And that turns out not to be true at all. And so even just breaking down what did that look like? What do these people like actually believe? What is Jesus? What is God? Like for real, not just like these random things that the media is trying to tell me. And then just staying as close to God as possible and being open to new experiences. Like I didn't just stay in my recovery program and in my little silo. Like I joined Bible studies from like a variety of different denominations because I had no idea what I'm doing. Then just let me just collect it all. Okay. Do you think this? Close enough. Let's move on. Like just all over the place with it. But it's been so helpful. I even today still go to churches of multiple denominations for what it's worth. But because I got friends at all of them, because I went to all of them and I like other people and whatever. It's all headed in the same direction. As long as Jesus for me is at the center, it's all headed in the same direction. And it's been just like staying hungry. And then the biggest thing for me is just like the faith that everything is in God's hands, no matter what. A funny example just from my like very current life is like the book came out. So the way that the book thing happened is a couple of years ago, I got laid off my job. I was working at a tech company that does like a AI based coaching for diabetes prevention. So I get laid off. And I remember going to a recovery meeting that day and some old timers there were like, I'm so excited to see what God has next for you. This is not a bad thing. I was like, are you sure? I don't have an income. And then that's when, like, my Instagram blew up to the ex I don't know, blow I had 4,000 followers at the time, and now I have 40, so I feel like that was a big difference. And then I got the book deal, and the book came out, and the weirdest thing so I've been like, "Okay, God, like, this is your plan, here it is." And the weirdest thing happened, so Christmas Day this year, I was on LinkedIn because my publisher has been like, "You should post on LinkedIn. And I'm like, how am I going to talk about God on LinkedIn? This is such a. So I was on there because I was trying to look up pastors to see if like pastors are talking on LinkedIn. So I was like, okay, let me see what they say to see if I can say something that's not weird. Especially because most of the people that connects to me on LinkedIn are all psychologists and scientists. And so I'm like, I don't know. At some point, I'm like, I just am weird, but how can I like try to be the least weird while doing this? So that's why I went on there. But then this job popped up, and I really liked my old job. I just got laid off because of part of God's plan. And this job popped up that's at what was basically like the main competitor of that company, very similar to the old role that I had. And I was like, this is interesting. So I applied to it. Yesterday, I had my fourth round of interview for that. If I'm supposed to have the job, what I did will be enough. And if I'm not supposed to have the job, it was supposed to be exactly what it was so that I would fail at exactly this time. I'm open enough to God's will in my life at this point that if it was that, it's that. If it is the job, it is the job. If it's that there's some other reason that I can't see yet, then there's some other reason that I can't see yet. But those have been really just like the biggest things is trust. The two things I was going to say is trusting God's will and then like daily, whatever you want to call it, like confession, that word scares people, but I see it as such a positive thing. But like daily confession, like every day I do actually look back in my day and say, like, where did I like miss the mark in things? And it can be as simple as people are like, that's not like an actual sin. And I'm like, I just want to get all clear of it so that I just feel like it's gotten rid of.
So good. So good. Tell us about the book.
Yeah. So it's called 52 Life Changing Lessons I Learned in Recovery. So it is the lesson one is like our stories heal us. This is mine. So the first one is my story, but then the other 50, and it's longer, it's 20 pages. But then the other ones are all just like 3 to 4 page lessons. The idea was one a week that you can just pick it up, read it, look at it, and they're all over the board. They're anything from like my views on alcoholism, which you got a little bit up in here, but like way deeper into that. My perception on like spiritually, what is a craving? How do you forgive people who harmed you? How do you understand forgiveness? What does it mean to have unconditional faith? What is the difference between faith and belief? Um, Spirituality and anxiety, shame, my thoughts on guilt. there, so there's all kinds of that chapter is called Guilt is Not a Feeling, which gets people a little riled up sometimes. There's stuff about eating disorders, but even if you don't suffer from those two, there's one little section called spiritual diagnostics. That's all of those essays, but the whole rest is just applicable to anyone who's interested in getting closer to God, growing spiritually.
Love
Yeah.
that.
It's
So good,
so
babe.
I know there are so many points of your story that, although so different than mine, I'm just going, yep, I can relate to that. And I love, especially, I would love to punctuate what you said at the end, because I think of, as someone who is a reformed perfectionist myself, when you were talking about how, like, the surrender and this is God's will for me, there's so much freedom in giving it over to God and letting Him steer and me not having to be in control. Newsflash, I never was, but I really liked to think that I was. And like when you were saying that right at the end, I'm like, I think about how full circle that is with your achievements, with your past, all that you've done, all the with the perfectionism, and then to just be in this place of, yeah, but God's in charge. God's got this, and I don't have to worry about this. I just love that this the redemption story in your story and that arc that's there. And so thank you for that.
yeah, thank you.
We always leave our listeners with a tiny Tina. So it's a tiny new action. If there was one thing to tell the gal who is feeling stuck, what would you say to her?
The two things that came to mind is sometimes you just need someone to be like, just go do something, right? If you feel like the thing that you need to do is go find a meeting, go do, I just saw your little Bible app thingy pop up on my phone. Open that, right? Like just take an action that moves you forward in some way. And there's so many different ways to even reach out to someone. I literally respond, at least so far, to 100% of DMs that I receive. Just reach out. There's a chance that the person who like has the recovery that you think you want will respond to your DM. And there's this girl that reached out to me probably 6 months ago because I had at one point that I like wanted to be a coach and put that up. And then I was like, no, I don't, and took it down. But she saw that and she was like, hey, I saw that coaching thing. Do you have it? And I was like, no, but we can like hop on a Google if you want. And we literally have been meeting every Wednesday for like
That
6 months, just like for I don't even know what. It's not like coaching. Nobody's paying anybody. So it's it's not anything. We just like are on Google. So you never know. Like God clearly wanted us in each other's lives for that purpose. So that's my number one thing is just take an action, especially if it's been in the back of your mind for a while. I always think that's God trying to nudge you. Um, and then I will just quickly say that the specific like thing that I do at night is selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. So those are like the four main things that I look at throughout the day, or like especially I try to look throughout the day, but at the end of the day. So at night, quick before I go to bed, that's what I'm thinking about is was selfishness is the biggest one because thinking that my way is right instead of God's is selfish, right? Like, there's a lot of things that fall in that. But did I spend most of the day thinking about myself or did I spend most of the day thinking what I could add to the world? Right. So that's selfishness. Dishonesty is pretty obvious. Did you lie today? And did you even like lie today, but you lied today? And then resentment. Am I holding on to any anger toward anybody? Because if I'm now in my bed it's not the 5 minutes of anger that's healthy to let it flow through my body. We're now onto some other thing. And then fear. So just as there are other things coming up that I'm fearful of that I need to turn over to God. So sometimes just to be like, confess to God, people are like, what? What do I need? So those are the four that I look at every day: resentment, dishonesty, um, selfishness, and fear.
I love that. Dr. Kurt Thompson, MD, says that confession is truth. Like the definition of
Yeah.
confession is truth. And that was a big reframe for me because I too am someone that like bristles at the idea of like confession. But when you just think about it in terms of you're just being honest, you're being truthful, like that changed everything for me. So I love your approach to that. There's something really powerful about getting it out into the light and not keeping it in. So
It feels so good. Even if I just
it
did some
does.
little thing, like, where I'm like, "Ugh, I did tell her that I was on my way and I was not on my way."
Yeah.
That it feels good to just lay in bed and be like, "Okay, God, I lied to her about whether I was on my way."
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. There's something really, yeah, really beautiful about that. Oh, thank you. Tell everybody where you are, where they can find you, where they can get the book.
Yeah, so my website is everything's Dr. Lisa Stanton. So my website is drlisastanton.com. And I say that first just because you can link to Instagram there, you can find the book there, you can find I have a list of podcasts I've been on. So when this comes out, the link will just be like right there on the website. So the website is an easy sort of like base. And there's a link to my Substack. So I would say the website, drlisastanton.com is the easiest, but Dr. Lisa Stanton on Instagram, um, Dr. Lisa Stanton on Substack. I have a little like thing there called Things on My Heart.
Oh, thank you for being here. We appreciate you and we loved listening to your story. So good. So good.
Yeah.
It's going to
Yeah.
bless
Thank
so
you
many
guys.
listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You can find all of our episodes at butjesusdrankwine.com and be sure to follow us over on Instagram, Love Life Sober, and I'm Not Sober, I'm Free.
To learn more about what we do, you can visit our websites, meethollandshirley.com and lovelifesober.com.
Take a screenshot of this podcast and share it with a friend or two.
And don't forget to subscribe to our pod so you don't have to worry about missing a single episode. And if you love what we're doing, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify.
This helps more women who are feeling stuck and alone in the overdrinking cycle find hope and encouragement.
Thanks, ladies. We so appreciate you, and we'll see you next Monday.